David Kinney was an ordinary young man living a simple life. When he turned 21, his mother decided to throw him a big celebration. Among the guests that evening was Sherry, a beautiful single mother who had come with her son. Throughout the night, David found himself strangely drawn to her, feeling an instant connection. The very next day, he told his mother he had found the love of his life and that he wanted to make his relationship with Sherry official. But not everyone in his circle shared the same excitement. Some questioned how such a young man could take on the responsibility of marrying a woman with 3 children, saying it was far too heavy a burden. Yet David was filled with love and commitment. He was ready to embrace that responsibility, to become part of Sherry's family, and to build a beautiful life together, and to make sure he could provide for them.
In a world of mystery, every secret has a beginning. Tonight on Soft Mystery, we uncover a case that shook a small town in Ohio, a friendship that turned into a hidden affair and ended in a brutal murder. This is the story of David Kinney and Brad McGarry.
In order to provide for his wife and children, David enrolled in a course to become a coal miner. It was a tough and dangerous job, but one that promised good pay to support his family. During this training, he met Brad McGarry. Brad was born in the 1970s in Cambridge, Ohio. His life had never been easy. Living openly as a gay man in a deeply conservative environment, he endured insults and prejudice. Yet, he stood firm, determined to live his truth. Over time, Brad built a small circle of close friends and pursued a career in hairstyling. But, in a small, working-class town, this profession was far from easy. Eventually, he made a bold decision to leave hairstyling behind and step into the coal mines. The contrast between the two worlds was stark, but Brad never looked back. There, he met David, and quickly the two became inseparable friends. Brad grew close to David's family, so much so that David's children affectionately called him Uncle Brad. The two men were rarely apart, always laughing, always sharing good times. By 2017, David was 30 years old, happily married to Sherry, and raising their children. Brad, meanwhile, was balancing his work, his time with family, and a secret relationship he kept hidden. On May 7, 2017, after attending a family gathering, Brad told a cousin he needed to return home for a meeting. It was around 6:15 p.m. David, Sherry, and their young daughter went to visit Brad at his home. They were surprised when no one answered the door, especially since his car was parked outside. Concern began to grow, so they walked around to the back of the house, where they found the service door unlocked. They called out for Brad, but there was no response. David stepped inside, while Sherry searched upstairs. As David made his way through the house, he descended into the basement, and there he was met with a horrifying sight. Brad's lifeless body lying face down in a pool of blood. Sherry rushed down at the sound of her husband's scream, only to be confronted with the same grim scene. She immediately dialed 911, and within minutes, police arrived at the house. When officers entered, They found David and Sherry visibly shaken, recounting how they had come to check on their friend, only to stumble upon a nightmare. They emphasized how close their bond with Brad had been. They often spent holidays together, their children loved him like an uncle, and they had even planned a trip to the Bahamas that coming August. When asked about any enemies or problems in Brad's life, David and Sherry mentioned that he had recently ended a troubled relationship with a man named Scotty, a relationship filled with conflict and heated arguments. The police began a careful examination of the scene. Brad was found lying face down in a pool of blood, clearly shot in the head. At first, some officers speculated it might have been suicide. But when the forensic expert arrived and asked about the weapon, none had been found. And when the body was turned over, it was clear there was no gun. The suicide theory collapsed instantly. As investigators combed through the house, they noticed the kitchen in disarray, drawers left open, and the living room in chaos. At first glance, it looked like a robbery gone wrong. But after a closer inspection, they realized nothing had been stolen, despite the presence of valuable items. The television was untouched, and even cash lay scattered on the floor. The police quickly concluded that the robbery had been staged, a cover to mislead them. And given that Brad was openly gay, working in a coal mine, in a conservative environment, detectives began to wonder, had Brad been the victim of a hate crime? When detectives spoke with Brad's colleagues at the mine, they were surprised to learn that everyone respected him and admired him, describing him as a good man. The theory that a co-worker might have been involved was quickly dismissed. Investigators then turned to Brad's friends and family, trying to build a timeline and gather any useful information. David and Sherry had already told police that Brad had recently ended a toxic relationship with a man named Scotty. This was confirmed by Brad's friend Wendy, who admitted she had always been against the relationship, saying Brad had become strangely entangled with Scotty. Detectives obtained Scotty's full name and rushed to his house to question him, but his mother told them he'd been in jail for the past 3 months for violating probation. That ruled him out as the direct killer, though investigators still considered the possibility that he could have orchestrated the crime from behind bars. Police visited Scotty in jail and informed him of Brad's death and carefully watched his reaction. He appeared genuinely shocked, and by the end of the interview, detectives had nearly ruled him out. Still desperate for leads, investigators canvassed the neighborhood, hoping for surveillance footage, and they got lucky. A neighbor had a camera facing the street near Brad's home. Even so, the case seemed to be stalling until 2 days later, when detectives interviewed one of Brad's cousins. Her testimony changed everything. She revealed that on the day of the murder, Brad had left a family lunch between 1:30 and 2 p.m., mentioning that someone named DJ was coming over. She added that Brad had joked he was planning to take a nap with his guest, a clear hint at a romantic encounter. She also admitted that Brad had confided in her. DJ was a married man who had never come out to his wife. The relationship had been going on for years, carefully hidden from the outside world. At first, she hesitated to reveal the man's identity, but under pressure from the lead investigator, she dropped the bombshell. DJ was David, the very man who had discovered Brad's dye. The detective was stunned, asking if she was certain.
She confirmed without hesitation David was the only man Brad had ever mentioned to her. From that moment, everything shifted. Up until then, David had been seen as a key witness, shaken, grieving, and cooperative. But this revelation turned the entire case upside down and transformed David into the prime suspect.
Under the pretense of needing photos from his phone related to the crime scene, detectives convinced David to hand over his device. In reality, they were tracking his location at the time of Brad's murder and searching for any evidence that might prove their relationship went beyond mere friendship. When they reviewed the phone's location data, they discovered that David's phone had been at Brad's house at the exact time of the shooting. Although David had deleted incriminating messages, a deeper forensic analysis uncovered text between him and Brad, confirming their romantic relationship. Meanwhile, another team was reviewing surveillance footage from Brad's neighbor. The video showed David arriving at Brad's house shortly before the estimated time of the murder. Strangely, he had come in his wife's car, not his own. The footage documented that he stayed for about 40 minutes before leaving, only to return hours later in his truck, this time with his wife and daughter under the pretense of delivering a weed trimmer. With all this evidence, police were confident they had enough to prove David's presence at Brad's home during the murder. When confronted, David admitted he had been there, but changed his story more than 7 times during interrogation. At one point, he claimed a mysterious man had been inside the house, killed Brad after an argument, and threatened David into silence. Detectives dismissed the story immediately, forcing David to change his account again. Eventually, he confessed to hiding an affair with Brad from his wife, Sherry. He insisted it had only lasted a few months. David claimed that Brad became angry when he tried to end the relationship, allegedly pulling a gun on him. According to David, a struggle followed, and he managed to wrestle the weapon away, shooting Brad in the head in self-defense. He even admitted to firing a second shot while Brad was already on the ground. But investigators quickly dismantled this version of events. Forensic analysis revealed that Brad had been shot twice in the back of the head, meaning the killer had been standing behind him, not facing him. When asked about the weapon, David said he had thrown it away while fleeing. Despite extensive searches, the gun was never recovered, but still, detectives were certain they had their man. Before taking him to jail, they allowed David to speak with his wife. The conversation was recorded and closely monitored. There, David admitted the affair and expressed regret, saying he wished he could take it all back. Sherry, devastated, broke down in tears. "Are you jocking me? I can't even look at you." Detectives were now convinced that Sherry had no prior knowledge of what had been happening behind her back. On May 9th, David was formally arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Investigators theorized that Brad, tired of living in secrecy, had threatened to expose the affair to Sherry, giving David the motive to kill his best friend in order to protect his double life. Before David appeared in court for a lengthy preliminary hearing in mid-May 2017, he faced the charges with his head bowed as officers testified and prosecutors highlighted the contradictions in his story. Police described how David had appeared visibly distraught at the crime scene, struggling to breathe, even vomiting from the shock of it all.
At first, David wrote in his statement that he was simply a friend, someone who had gone to return a weed trimmer and by chance discovered Brad's body in the basement. But the lead investigator later presented his final statement, in which David admitted that he had shot Brad in self-defense, though he never revealed where the weapon had gone. Despite exhaustive searches, it was never found. The autopsy results became a turning point, completely dismantling David's claim. The report showed that Brad had been shot twice in the back of the head, something utterly inconsistent with self-defense. David's attorney tried to defend him in court, urging that David was not a danger to society and that the tragedy was the result of unique circumstances. He insisted that at worst, this was manslaughter, not murder, and that David had acted out of fear. David himself remained silent throughout a 3-hour hearing, during which multiple witnesses testified. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, the judge ruled there was enough probable cause to send the case to the higher court, setting bail at $1 million. David's lawyer immediately requested a reduction, claiming the amount was impossible to pay, but the judge refused. Weeks later, the defense filed more than a dozen motions, including another request to lower bail. This hearing was attended by many of David's friends and family, who came to support him. The lawyer asked that bail be reduced to $250,000, an amount the Kinney family could manage. Several witnesses took the stand, including David's wife, his mother, his father-in-law, and his stepfather. They all described him as an honorable, hardworking, responsible man, a loving husband and father. Sherry herself testified that David had supported her and her 3 children emotionally and financially for 10 years, even though they were not his biological children. But under cross-examination, Sherry was asked about May 7th. She said her husband told her they were going to return a weed trimmer. When the judge asked if David had acted strangely that day, she said she noticed nothing unusual. She described how they arrived, knocked on the door, found the back door open, and entered the house, which appeared ransacked, before David went down to the basement and shouted for her to call 911. After hearing all arguments, the judge concluded that good character testimony was not enough to justify reducing bail. He emphasized that David had deceived his wife and daughter, taking them into a house where a dead body lay under the pretense of an innocent errand. The trial then began, lasting an entire week. The prosecution presented damning evidence, surveillance footage showing David arriving at Brad's house before the murder and returning later with his family. They also showed police body cam footage, which revealed David had been lying from the very beginning. One of the most striking testimonies came from a forensic expert who revealed DNA evidence from a controversial discovery. A used condom was found, Brad's DNA on the outside, and the DNA of an unknown male on the inside, but no trace of David's DNA. This revelation sparked heated debate, as it directly contradicted the detective's theory that David had killed Brad solely to protect his secret double life.
According to the lead detective, David had lured Brad with the promise of intimacy, then killed him and tried to cover up the crime as best he could. The defense, however, argued that David acted out of fear, that he was only defending himself. Even David's own attorney admitted that his client had not always been truthful and that some of his actions were strange, but insisted that this did not make him a murderer. The prosecution countered with force. 2 bullets to the back of the head were not self-defense. They explained that Brad had been on his knees when he was shot, the first bullet striking the upper part of his head, the second entering the base of his skull. After closing arguments, the jury withdrew to deliberate. 4 tense hours passed, the courtroom heavy with silence. When they returned, the judge read the unanimous verdict, guilty of aggravated murder. The room erupted in gasps and tears. Before sentencing, David was given the chance to speak. He apologized to Brad's family for the pain he had caused, saying he never intended for any of this to happen and that he wished he could turn back time. He admitted that no apology could ever bring Brad back, but wanted them to know he truly regretted everything. The judge, however, was unmoved. He listed the many lies David had told to cover his tracks, calling the crime a cold, calculated execution followed by an elaborate cover-up.
The judge declared that David had premeditated Brad's murder, luring him, staging the crime scene, and taking multiple steps to conceal the truth. There were 4 sentencing options before the court. All life imprisonment, but with varying chances of parole after 20, 25, or 30 years. David's attorney pleaded for the lightest option, pointing out that David had no prior criminal record. But the prosecution demanded life without parole, reminding the court that Brad had lost his life and his family would live with that loss forever. The judge responded firmly. If David was capable of killing someone who loved him, his very best friend, then what might he do to someone who opposed him? He cannot be allowed to return to public life. In February 2018, the sentence was handed down. Life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 3 additional years for the use of a firearm. Police later described the case as a tragedy that could have been avoided if David had not been so obsessed with hiding his sexuality. By mid-2023, prison records confirmed David remained incarcerated in Ohio. His attorney had filed multiple appeals, always seeking the possibility of parole, but every appeal was denied. In the end, neither man returned to the coal mines. Brad lost his life, David lost his freedom. Both lives forever destroyed by David's actions.